My name is Eric, 64 years old, retired engineer from Boston. I never imagined my own son Thomas would formally excommunicate me from our family during Christmas dinner. After decades trying to be the father I thought he needed, I stood there watching everything shatter like fine crystal on concrete. Behind his cold eyes, I saw my ex-wife, Margaret's disappointment, though she's been gone 5 years now. Family ties can unravel in an instant, but what happens when you're prepared for the cut? I had a folder ready. Let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to find out what happened when Thomas opened what I handed him. I spent most of my working years at Barrett Engineering, one of Boston's most prestigious firms specializing in infrastructure design. 60-hour weeks were standard 70 to 80 during crunch periods. I was known for my precision, dedication, and availability at all hours. The company valued these traits enough to fast-track my promotions, something I took immense pride in at the time. I met Margaret during our junior year at MIT. She was studying computer science when it was still a male-dominated field. Her brilliant mind, warm laugh, and no-nonsense attitude captured my attention immediately. We dated for 2 years before marrying in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Those early years were blissful. We were partners in everything, staying up late discussing technical problems or planning our future. We bought a small house in a good neighborhood, thinking ahead to the family we both wanted. Thomas arrived 3 years into our marriage. I still remember holding him for the first time, this tiny, perfect human being with Margaret's eyes. I promised myself I would be the best father possible, better than my own distant father had been. For the first few months, I took time off work, helped with night feedings, and felt fully present in our new family dynamic. Then reality set in. A major bridge project came up at Barrett, and I was offered a leading role that could cement my reputation in the industry. I took it without hesitation. Margaret supported the decision initially, understanding the opportunity it represented. But weeks of late nights turned into months of physical and emotional absence. Thomas was walking and starting to talk when I realized how much I was missing. I would come home after he was asleep and leave before he woke up. Weekends became my catch-up time, but I was often distracted checking emails or taking calls. Margaret shouldered the bulk of parenting while maintaining her part-time consulting work. "He said data today," Margaret would tell me excitedly. "He's trying to copy what you say when you talk about work." I'd smile and feel a momentary connection, but then my phone would buzz and I'd be pulled back into work matters. This pattern continued as Thomas grew older. He was a bright, sensitive child who craved attention and validation, precisely what I was too busy to provide consistently. The missed moments piled up like unpaid debts. His first T-ball game where he hit the ball past second base. I was in Chicago for a conference. The science fair where his wind turbine project won first place. I arrived just as they were announcing the winners, having missed his presentation entirely. His 10th birthday party. I was there physically, but spent half the time on conference calls in the backyard. "Dad, watch this," became a phrase I heard often but rarely honored with my full attention. By the time Thomas reached 13, the damage was evident. He stopped asking me to attend his events. When I tried to engage him in conversation, his responses became monosyllabic. Margaret tried to bridge the gap between us, but her efforts only highlighted my failures. "He needs you, not your gifts," she would say, when I brought home expensive presents to compensate for my absence. "He's becoming a young man, and he doesn't know who his father really is." The arguments between Margaret and me increased in frequency. What started as gentle reminders about family commitments became tearful confrontations about priorities and values. "You're building bridges across rivers while burning the ones to your own son," she said during one particularly painful fight. Thomas's teenage years were a fortress I couldn't breach. He developed interests in music and computer programming that I knew little about. When I tried to connect by buying him top-of-the-line equipment, he accepted the gifts but remained emotionally distant. I could feel him slipping away, but I didn't know how to stop it. Margaret became both mother and father to him, attending every school event, helping with homework, discussing his future plans. They developed inside jokes and rituals that excluded me not by design, but by my own absence. I became the provider, the distant figure who existed on the periphery of their close bond. When Thomas was 17, he announced he was applying to colleges on the West Coast. The message was clear. He wanted physical distance from Boston from me. He was accepted to Stanford with a partial scholarship, and despite the financial strain, Margaret supported his decision. "It's where he needs to go to become his own person," she told me. I helped pack his belongings into shipping containers, wrote the tuition checks, and drove him to the airport. As we said goodbye, I tried to express what was in my heart. I'm proud of you, son. I know I haven't always been there, but I love you. He nodded politely. Thanks for the education, Dad. I'll make good use of it. It wasn't until he disappeared through security that I fully comprehended what I had lost. Not just my son's presence, but his trust, his affection, the relationship we might have had. I turned to Margaret in the car, tears finally coming after years of emotional suppression. I've made a terrible mistake, haven't I? She took my hand, her expression a mix of sympathy and resignation. It's not too late to start fixing it, but it's going to take more than words, Eric. It's going to take showing up consistently even when he pushes you away. I nodded, making a silent promise to do better. But like many well-intentioned resolutions, this one proved harder to implement than to make. During his college years, Thomas called home less and less frequently. Initially, he would check in weekly, mainly speaking with Margaret about classes and campus life. My attempts at conversation during these calls were awkward, filled with generic questions that Thomas answered politely but briefly. By sophomore year, the calls came monthly, then only on holidays. I sent emails that received delayed formal responses. It was clear he was establishing his independence, but the distance felt deliberate, punitive. Thomas met Amanda during his junior year in a business ethics class. They were paired for a semester-long project, and according to what little he shared with Margaret, they clicked immediately. Amanda was from an affluent California family with connections in the tech industry. She was studying business administration with plans to join her family's investment firm after graduation. The first time we heard her voice was during a rare video call at Christmas. She sat close to Thomas, her polished appearance and confident demeanor immediately noticeable. While Thomas had always been somewhat reserved, Amanda spoke with authority about their relationship, their academic successes, and their plans for an upcoming ski trip with her family. It's so nice to finally meet Thomas's parents, she said with a practiced smile. He talks about you all the time. Margaret and I exchanged a quick glance, both knowing this wasn't likely true. I sensed something controlling beneath Amanda's charm. The way she corrected Thomas subtly when he spoke, her dismissive tone when Margaret mentioned Thomas's childhood interest in astronomy. When I asked about his computer science projects, Amanda answered before Thomas could. Thomas is actually focusing more on business applications now. My father thinks pure programming is becoming commoditized, but understanding how technology intersects with business strategy is where the real opportunities are. Thomas nodded in agreement, though I caught a flicker of something, reluctance perhaps, in his expression. After graduating with honors, Thomas and Amanda announced their engagement. The ring featured a substantial diamond that Thomas couldn't possibly have afforded on his own. They planned a short engagement, just 6 months before a December wedding in Napa Valley. Margaret and I discussed our concerns privately. She seems to be calling all the shots, I said after a particularly frustrating call about wedding arrangements. She does, Margaret agreed. But Thomas is an adult making his own choices. We need to support him while being here if things don't work out. The wedding planning became a series of announcements rather than consultations. Amanda's parents had selected the venue, hired the planner, chosen the menu. When I offered to contribute financially, I had been saving for Thomas's wedding since his birth, I was politely but firmly rebuffed. Amanda's father wants to handle everything, Thomas explained. It's important to him. But we're your parents, Margaret said gently. We'd like to be involved too. You can provide the rehearsal dinner, Amanda suggested in a tone that indicated this was a concession rather than an invitation. Even that proved challenging. The restaurant Amanda selected required a substantial deposit. When I asked about alternative venues, Thomas sent a terse email explaining that changing the location would disrupt the entire weekend schedule Amanda's parents had arranged. The wedding day itself felt like attending an event where we happened to know the groom. Amanda's family, extensive and uniformly successful according to the conversations I overheard, dominated the proceedings. They filled the front rows during the ceremony, gave multiple speeches at the reception, and controlled the flow of the entire day. Margaret and I sat at a table with distant cousins of Amanda rather than at the family table. My single toast, carefully written and practiced, was limited to 30 seconds due to time constraints, while Amanda's father spoke for 15 minutes about the power of strategic alliances and his daughter's discerning nature. I watched Thomas throughout the day, looking for signs of my son beneath the designer suit and carefully neutral expressions. During one rare moment alone near the bar, I tried to connect. "Are you happy, Thomas?" "That's all that matters to me." He looked surprised by the question. "Of course, Amanda and her family have opened doors I never imagined possible." "Doors are good," I said carefully, "as long as you can still be yourself once you walk through them." Before he could respond, Amanda appeared at his side. "There you are. Daddy's business partner wants to discuss potential positions at his firm." She nodded politely to me. "Excuse us, Eric." Not Dad or Mr. Parker or even Thomas's father, just Eric, as though I were a casual acquaintance. It was around this time that Margaret began experiencing unusual fatigue and occasional pain in her abdomen. She dismissed it initially as stress from the wedding preparations, but I noticed her wincing when she thought I wasn't looking. I made her promise to see a doctor when we returned to Boston. After the wedding, Thomas and Amanda moved to Seattle, where both had secured positions through Amanda's family connections. Thomas joined a tech company as a business development manager, far from the computer engineering career he had originally planned. Amanda worked at a satellite office of her father's investment firm, fast-tracked for leadership. Their communication became increasingly formal and infrequent. Christmas cards featuring professional photos of them in coordinated outfits, birthday emails that read like form letters, brief calls on holidays where Amanda always seemed to be monitoring Thomas's side of the conversation. Through social media, we glimpsed their rising affluence. A luxury condo downtown vacations to exclusive resorts charity galas where they posed with local celebrities. In these carefully curated images, Thomas looked like a stranger, his casual clothes replaced by bespoke suits, his relaxed smile now practiced and camera-ready. What troubled me most was how Thomas and Amanda seemed to spend every holiday and significant occasion with her family. Thanksgiving at her parents' Aspen home, Christmas at their Maui property, Easter brunches, 4th of July celebrations, even casual weekends documented in photos where Amanda's parents were constant fixtures, while Margaret and I remained thousands of miles away, uninvited and increasingly forgotten. The doctor's appointment Margaret finally agreed to attend delivered devastating news: stage 4 pancreatic cancer already spread to her liver. The prognosis was bleak, perhaps a year with aggressive treatment, less without it. I was shattered. Margaret, ever practical, immediately began organizing her affairs and making treatment decisions. I took an indefinite leave of absence from work, shocking my colleagues who had never known me to prioritize anything above my career. The irony wasn't lost on me that it took Margaret's terminal illness to finally shift my priorities. "I need to call Thomas," Margaret said the evening after her diagnosis. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she dialed. Thomas expressed appropriate shock and concern during the call. He asked about treatment options, prognosis, and practical matters. He promised to visit soon once he sorted things out at work. Margaret put on a brave face, telling him not to worry, that we would keep him updated. After hanging up, she cried for the first time since the diagnosis. Weeks passed. Margaret began chemotherapy that ravaged her body but did little to slow the cancer. I became her full-time caregiver, scheduling appointments, managing medications, preparing what little food she could tolerate, helping her bathe when she became too weak to do it herself. Through it all, Thomas remained physically absent, though he sent flowers twice and called weekly for brief updates. Margaret never complained about his absence, but I could see the hurt in her eyes when she looked at photos of Thomas on our mantel. 3 months into treatment, Margaret's oncologist confirmed what we already suspected. The therapy wasn't working. The cancer was aggressive, and her body was weakening rapidly. The doctor suggested discontinuing chemotherapy and focusing on comfort care. Margaret agreed, relieved to be free of the debilitating side effects, even as it meant accepting a shorter timeline. I called Thomas immediately after the appointment. "Your mother doesn't have much time left," I said bluntly. "You need to come now if you want to say goodbye." "Dad, I'm in the middle of a crucial acquisition. Amanda and I have tickets to visit next month when things settle down." "She might not have a month, Thomas. The doctors are talking weeks, maybe less." Silence stretched across the line. Finally, he said, "Let me talk to Amanda and see what we can arrange." What followed was a series of excuses. Amanda had important client meetings. Flights were prohibitively expensive on short notice. They had non-refundable reservations for a weekend in wine country. With each call, I became more desperate, more direct. "Your mother is dying, Thomas. Nothing else should matter right now." "You don't understand the pressure I'm under, Dad," he responded. "I can't just drop everything." Margaret continued to decline. She lost weight until she was barely recognizable. Pain became a constant companion managed increasingly by morphine that left her drifting in and out of lucidity. During her clear moments, she never asked where Thomas was, but sometimes in her sleep she called his name. Finally, when Margaret was moved to hospice care, Thomas arrived, alone, explaining that Amanda had a previous commitment. He spent less than 24 hours in Boston. His visit with Margaret lasted barely an hour. An awkward interaction where he stood at the foot of her bed, clearly uncomfortable with her transformed appearance and the medical equipment surrounding her. "You look good, Mom," he said, the lie transparent. Margaret, summoning strength. I didn't know she still possessed, reached for his hand. "Be happy, Thomas. That's all I've ever wanted for you. And remember who you are." He nodded stiffly, kissed her forehead, and left soon after, claiming he had an early flight the next morning. 3 days later, Margaret slipped away peacefully while I held her hand. Thomas was in Seattle, unreachable due to poor cell reception, on a company retreat. The funeral was sparsely attended. Margaret's few remaining relatives, some colleagues from her consulting days, neighbors who had become friends. Thomas and Amanda flew in the morning of the service and left immediately after citing work commitments. Thomas gave no eulogy, spoke minimally to the other attendees, and stood stone-faced as the casket was lowered into the ground. I was too numb with grief to confront him about his behavior. Perhaps some part of me understood that doing so would only drive him further away. Instead, I focused on surviving each day without the woman who had been my partner for nearly 4 decades. That first Christmas after Margaret's death was when the full weight of my isolation descended. Our house, once warmed by Margaret's presence, felt cavernous and cold. Thomas sent a gift basket from an expensive retailer with a pre-printed card. I called to thank him and invite him to visit, but the conversation was brief and ended with vague promises to get together soon. As I sat alone with my microwave dinner on Christmas Eve, surrounded by decorations Margaret had lovingly collected over the years, I faced a harsh truth: my son had become a stranger, and I had no one to blame but myself. The workaholic father had reaped what he sowed. A son who learned that career came before family, that physical and emotional absence was acceptable, that relationships were secondary to success. The realization broke something open inside me. I wept for the first time since Margaret's funeral, not just for her loss, but for the relationship with my son that had never truly existed and now seemed beyond salvaging. After that lonely Christmas, I made a decision that surprised even me. I took early retirement from Barrett Engineering. My colleagues were shocked. The firm offered incentives to stay, but I declined. 4 decades of prioritizing work had cost me my family. I wouldn't waste whatever time I had left in the same pattern. For the first few months of retirement, I drifted without purpose. I slept late, ate irregularly, and spent too much time staring at the walls. The house felt like a museum of my failures. Thomas's untouched bedroom, Margaret's clothing. I couldn't bear to donate family photos that depicted moments I had barely been present for. On the recommendation of my doctor, who was concerned about my increasing isolation, I began seeing Dr. Levine, a therapist specializing in grief and family estrangement. Our first sessions were painful excavations of my past choices. I was physically present but emotionally absent. I admitted during one particularly difficult session, I thought providing financial security was enough. I thought they knew I loved them, even though I rarely showed it. "Many men of your generation were raised to believe providing was equivalent to loving," Dr. Levine observed. "What would you do differently if you could go back?" The question haunted me for days. I began making lists. Baseball games I should have attended, school plays I had missed, family vacations canceled for work emergencies. The exercise wasn't meant to torture me, but to help identify what truly mattered so I could make different choices moving forward. With Dr. Levine's encouragement, I began reaching out to Thomas more consistently. I sent emails sharing memories of Margaret, old family stories, reflections on my own mistakes. Most went unanswered or received brief, non-committal responses. I called monthly, though our conversations rarely lasted more than 5 minutes. I sent thoughtful packages, books I thought he might enjoy, a refurbished telescope like the one he had loved as a child, handwritten letters expressing my desire to know him as an adult. Some were acknowledged with perfunctory thank you texts, others received no response at all. After 8 months of one-sided efforts, I decided to visit Seattle. I emailed Thomas my planned dates and suggested meeting for dinner. His reply came 3 days later. He and Amanda could spare one evening during my week-long stay. I spent the interim days exploring Seattle alone, trying not to feel like an unwelcome intruder in my son's city. The dinner itself was at an expensive restaurant where Thomas and Amanda were clearly regulars. The maitre d' greeted them by name, and Amanda spent several minutes discussing wine options with the sommelier while Thomas checked emails on his phone. "So, Dad," Thomas finally said once our orders were placed, "how are you filling your time since retirement?" Before I could answer fully, Amanda interjected, "Thomas tells me you were quite the workaholic. Must be difficult to adjust to having nothing to do." "Actually, I've been volunteering with a program that teaches engineering concepts to underprivileged high school students," I replied. "I'm finding it quite rewarding." "How charitable," Amanda said with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. The conversation continued in this vein, any personal disclosure met with polite disinterest or subtle dismissal. When I asked about their lives, I received carefully curated highlights that focused on professional achievements and material acquisitions. "Would it be possible to meet my grandchildren before I leave?" I asked toward the end of the meal. Margaret and I had learned via a Christmas card that Thomas and Amanda had 2 children, Jackson age 4 and Sophia age 2. Thomas and Amanda exchanged glances. "We could arrange a brief visit tomorrow afternoon," Amanda said. "The children have music lessons and French immersion class, but there's a window around 3 o'clock. The following day, I arrived at their luxury downtown condominium precisely at 3. The home was immaculate, more like a showcase than a place where young children lived. The children themselves were perfectly groomed and unnervingly well-behaved. They greeted me with rehearsed politeness, calling me Grandfather Parker at Amanda's prompting. I had brought gifts, age-appropriate books and toys chosen with care. The children thanked me automatically, but looked to their mother before touching the packages. "You can open them later," Amanda instructed. "We don't want to make a mess now." For 45 minutes, I attempted to connect with my grandchildren, while Amanda hovered nearby, intercepting and redirecting any conversation that became too personal or spontaneous. When I mentioned a story about Thomas as a child, she quickly changed the subject. "Jackson, tell Grandfather Parker about your piano recital," she prompted. It became painfully clear that the children knew almost nothing about me or their grandmother. When I mentioned Margaret's love of stargazing, Sophia looked confused. "Who is Margaret?" she asked innocently. "That was your father's mother," Amanda explained briefly. "She passed away before you were born." "Like Grandma and Grandpa Miller's dog?" Jackson asked, referring presumably to Amanda's parents. "Something like that," Amanda replied. "Now it's nearly time for your French lesson. Say goodbye to Grandfather Parker." The children obediently offered their cheeks for me to kiss, then disappeared with their nanny. I left shortly after, heart heavy with the realization that not only had I lost my son, but my grandchildren were being raised without any knowledge of their paternal heritage or family history. Despite this discouraging visit, I persisted in my efforts to maintain contact. I sent birthday cards with personal messages. I called on holidays. I emailed photos I found of Thomas's childhood with stories about each one. Sometimes there would be a brief thaw, a slightly longer phone call, a more personal email response, but inevitably the wall would go back up. Dr. Levine helped me process these disappointments. "You can't control Thomas's response," she reminded me. "You can only control your own actions and boundaries." I channeled my frustrated parental energy into my volunteer work, becoming a mentor to several promising students. I joined a grief support group where I met others struggling with loss and estrangement. I renovated Thomas's old bedroom, replacing the teenage decor with child-friendly furnishings, in hopes that someday my grandchildren might visit. As months stretched into years, the emotional toll of constant rejection became harder to bear. Even Dr. Levine noticed my increasing resignation. "There comes a point," she said gently during one session, "when self-respect requires setting boundaries. Continuing to pursue a relationship that causes you consistent pain might not be healthy." "Are you suggesting I give up on my son?" I asked. "I'm suggesting you consider what kind of relationship is acceptable to you. Being a father doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Love with boundaries is still love." Her words stayed with me, prompting deep reflection about what I was willing to accept in my relationship with Thomas. I realized I had been so desperate to atone for my past neglect that I had accepted a relationship entirely on his and Amanda's terms, regardless of how it affected me. That realization led to significant changes in my approach, not abandoning efforts to connect, but adjusting my expectations and establishing self-protective boundaries. It was this new mindset that I carried into what would become the most pivotal holiday gathering of our troubled history. The call came on Thanksgiving Day, catching me by surprise as I was preparing a small turkey breast for my solitary dinner. Seeing Thomas's name on the caller ID was unusual enough that my heart raced a little as I answered. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad," he said, his tone formal but not unfriendly. "I hope you're well." "I am, thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you too," I replied, waiting for the reason behind this unexpected call. After exchanging brief pleasantries about the weather and my volunteer work, Thomas cleared his throat. "Amanda and I were discussing the holidays, and we thought it might be nice if you joined us for Christmas this year, in Seattle." I nearly dropped the phone. In 7 years since Margaret's death, I had never been invited to their home for a holiday celebration. "I'd love that, Thomas. Thank you for the invitation." "Great," he said, sounding oddly relieved. "We'll have Christmas Eve dinner at our house with Amanda's parents. Then Christmas Day brunch and gifts." "That sounds wonderful. Should I book a hotel nearby?" "Yes, that would be best. The children are excited about Santa coming, so the house will be rather chaotic." After providing some logistical details and promising to email me their address, Thomas ended the call. I stood in my kitchen, equal parts elated and suspicious. Why now, after years of distance, what had changed? I called Dr. Levine for an emergency session the next day. "This could be a positive development," she said cautiously. "Perhaps Thomas is reconsidering the importance of family connections. Or Amanda's parents suggested it for appearance's sake." I countered, having grown skeptical of my daughter-in-law's motives over the years. "Either way, it's an opportunity," Dr. Levine pointed out. "Go with clear eyes but an open heart. Manage your expectations while remaining receptive to genuine connection." I spent the next 3 weeks preparing for the visit with meticulous care. I selected thoughtful gifts for everyone, educational toys for the children, a rare first edition for Thomas of an author he had enjoyed in college, elegant cashmere scarves for Amanda and her mother, fine scotch for her father. I had each item professionally wrapped, wanting everything to be perfect. I also prepared emotionally, working with Dr. Levine on strategies for navigating potentially difficult interactions. We role-played responses to dismissive comments. We practiced techniques for connecting with the grandchildren in limited time. We discussed boundaries I would maintain to protect my dignity while remaining open to reconciliation. There was one more preparation I made, one I didn't discuss with Dr. Levine. After consulting with my attorney, I organized a folder containing documentation of recent changes to my will and estate plan. I hadn't made these changes vindictively, but as part of my overall life reassessment after retirement. Still, I brought the folder to Seattle as a contingency, a form of emotional insurance against worst-case scenarios. The flight to Seattle on December 23rd was turbulent, perhaps a fitting metaphor for the visit ahead. I checked into my hotel, a comfortable establishment 15 minutes from Thomas and Amanda's home, and spent the evening reviewing the family photos I had brought as potential conversation starters. Christmas Eve morning, I woke early, too anxious to sleep. I polished my shoes, ironed my shirt, and triple-checked the gifts I had shipped ahead. At the last minute, I slipped the folder into my briefcase, telling myself it was merely precautionary. I arrived at Thomas and Amanda's home precisely at the time specified in Thomas's email, 4 o'clock for a 6 o'clock dinner. The house was a stunning 3-story Tudor in one of Seattle's most exclusive neighborhoods. Holiday lights outlined every architectural feature, and a professional decorator had clearly been engaged for the interior, visible through the large front windows. Amanda answered the door, her smile practiced. "Eric, welcome. You're right on time. Not Dad or even Mr. Parker. Still just Eric." The inside of the home was even more impressive than its exterior. Soaring ceilings, museum-quality art, and a massive Christmas tree decorated in a coordinated silver and blue theme. No homemade ornaments or sentimental decorations marred its perfect symmetry. Thomas emerged from what appeared to be a home office, ending a phone call as he approached. "Dad, you made it. Good to see you." The handshake he offered felt corporate rather than familial. Amanda's parents arrived shortly after, greeted with genuine warmth and affection by both Thomas and Amanda. The grandchildren ran to embrace them, calling out, "Grandma Miller" and "Grandpa Miller" with obvious delight. "Mom, Dad, you remember Eric," Amanda said, gesturing toward me with the casual wave one might use to indicate a distant acquaintance. Gerald and Vivian Miller nodded politely in my direction before being ushered to the place of honor near the fireplace. Throughout the pre-dinner drinks and conversation, I observed the family dynamics with increasing discomfort. Thomas deferred to Gerald on every topic from politics to investment strategies. Amanda consulted Vivian before making even minor decisions about dinner service or children's bedtimes. The children, now 7 and 5, clearly adored their maternal grandparents. The walls featured numerous photos of them with the Millers, at their Aspen home on their yacht at Disney World. Not a single photograph of me or Margaret was visible anywhere in the house. My attempts to engage with Jackson and Sophia were constantly redirected by Amanda. "Grandfather Parker, perhaps you'd like to see the children's school portraits," she would say, cutting off any personal conversation and steering toward more formal interaction. The Christmas Eve dinner was a culinary masterpiece prepared by their private chef, but the conversation remained superficial and exclusive. Gerald dominated with stories of recent business triumphs and luxury travel experiences. Vivian discussed the children's accomplishments and her own charity board positions. Amanda provided perfect supporting commentary. Thomas nodded and agreed with everything. I tried several times to contribute meaningfully, sharing a brief story about my volunteer work with young engineers or asking Thomas about his current projects. Each attempt was met with polite but minimal response before Gerald or Amanda redirected the conversation. When I mentioned a memory of Thomas's childhood science project, Amanda smoothly interrupted. "Speaking of science, Jackson's private tutor believes he shows exceptional aptitude. We're considering enrolling him in an advanced program next fall." The pattern continued through dessert and coffee. The gifts I had brought remained unopened, set aside for the Christmas morning exchange. When I inquired about attending their church service the next morning, Amanda explained that they had a private family tradition that wouldn't accommodate additional participants. "But please come by around 11 for brunch and gifts," she added with practiced graciousness. As the evening drew to a close, I felt increasingly certain that this invitation had not been motivated by any desire for reconciliation. I was an outsider here, tolerated briefly for some purpose I couldn't yet discern. The contrast between the warm, reciprocal relationship Thomas had with the Millers and the cold formality he maintained with me couldn't have been starker. I returned to my hotel room emotionally exhausted, calling Dr. Levine despite the late hour. "It feels like I'm attending a business function rather than a family Christmas," I confessed. "They're all playing roles in some performance where I'm barely a supporting character." "Remember your boundaries," she counseled. "You don't have to accept whatever scraps of attention they offer. If tomorrow continues this way, it's okay to excuse yourself early." I slept poorly. My dreams filled with images of closed doors and tables where my chair had been removed. In the morning, I considered canceling, claiming illness or an emergency back home. But something, pride perhaps or stubborn hope, pushed me to follow through. I arrived at 11 as requested, arms loaded with the gifts that had been set aside the previous evening. Amanda's parents were already there, mimosas in hand, looking completely at home. The children were dressed in matching Christmas outfits, posing for photos by the tree. "Eric, come in," Amanda called. "We're just about to start brunch." The meal followed the same pattern as the previous evening. The Millers at the center of all attention and conversation, Thomas and Amanda deferential to them, the children performing on cue with rehearsed politeness. After brunch came the gift exchange, a carefully orchestrated event where Amanda distributed presents in a specific order. The children received extravagant gifts from their parents and the Millers: a junior luxury smartwatch for Jackson, a child-sized electric luxury car for Sophia. Thomas and Amanda exchanged equally lavish presents. The Millers were given a document indicating a planned family vacation to a private island. When my gifts were finally distributed, they were opened with mechanical politeness. The educational toys I had chosen for the children were acknowledged briefly before being set aside for the more exciting electronic gifts. Thomas glanced at the rare book with minimal interest. Amanda and her parents barely looked at their presents before thanking me with practiced phrases. No one had brought a gift for me. As the wrapping paper was being cleared away by their housekeeper, I noticed Thomas and Amanda exchanging significant glances with the Millers. Something was coming, some moment they had been building toward. Thomas stood up, champagne glass in hand, and cleared his throat. The room fell silent. "While we're all gathered here, there's something important I need to say." His tone was formal, his posture stiff. I recognized the signs of a rehearsed speech. "Dad," he began, though the words sounded foreign in his mouth. "Over the past year, Amanda, her parents, and I have had many serious conversations about family legacy and what truly constitutes meaningful relationships." I felt a chill settle over me. The folder in my briefcase suddenly seemed prescient. We've come to the difficult but necessary conclusion that some relationships are more harmful than beneficial. After careful consideration, and yes, even a formal vote, we have decided that you are no longer to be considered a member of our family." The words hung in the air like icicles, sharp, cold, dangerous. Your pattern of neglect during my childhood, your disrespect toward Amanda and her family's guidance, and your attempts to insert yourself into our children's lives without proper appreciation for the values we're instilling have led us to this point. I sat perfectly still, feeling oddly calm, as years of therapy allowed me to process this moment with unexpected clarity. We believe a clean break is best for everyone, especially the children. This will be our last contact. All communication should go through our family attorney moving forward." Amanda nodded approvingly. Her parents maintained carefully neutral expressions. The children looked confused but remained silent, trained never to question adult decisions. Thomas continued listing grievances that stretched back decades: missed baseball games, working late on birthdays, insufficient enthusiasm for Amanda's family's accomplishments. Some were valid reflections of my failures as a young father. Others were bizarre reinterpretations of events clearly influenced by Amanda and her parents' perspective. As he spoke, I thought of Margaret, what she would say, how she would feel seeing our son this way. I thought of Dr. Levine's words about boundaries and self-respect. I thought about the years of rejection I had endured while trying to make amends. When Thomas finally finished his speech, the room fell silent, all eyes on me, waiting for the hurt, the pleading, the desperate attempts to change their minds they clearly expected. Instead, I smiled. The reaction visibly unsettled Thomas. This wasn't in his script. Calmly, I reached for my briefcase and withdrew the folder I had prepared. I stood up, crossed the room, and handed it to Thomas. "Here's a parting gift for you," I said quietly. "Something to remember me by." Thomas stared at the folder in confusion, clearly thrown off script by my calm demeanor. Amanda moved to his side, her composed facade cracking slightly with curiosity. "What is this?" Thomas asked, hesitating to open it. "Just some paperwork I thought you should have," I replied, maintaining a neutral tone. "Go ahead, take a look." With visible reluctance, Thomas opened the folder. Inside were several neatly organized documents with color-coded tabs. The first was a copy of my revised will, dated 6 months earlier. As he skimmed the content, his expression shifted from confusion to shock. "This says you've left your entire estate to a scholarship fund for engineering students," he said, voice rising slightly, "and a portion to the Cancer Research Center where Mom was treated." "That's correct," I confirmed. After considerable reflection, I decided that would be the best use of my resources. The second document detailed the liquidation of several significant investments and the subsequent charitable donations I had made in Margaret's name. "You sold the vacation property in Cape Cod?" Thomas asked incredulously. "And the stock portfolio grandfather left you?" "Yes. The proceeds funded a new wing at the children's hospital where you were born. Margaret always supported their work." Amanda grabbed the folder from Thomas, rifling through the papers with increasing agitation. "What about the family heirlooms, Margaret's jewelry, the antiques?" I gestured toward the next tab. "The documentation of their donation to the Boston Historical Society and various museums is there. Margaret's grandmother's pieces were particularly welcomed by the Textile Museum." By now, Gerald and Vivian Miller had moved closer, their practiced neutrality abandoned as they peered over Amanda's shoulder at the documents. The children, sensing the adults' discomfort, had retreated to a corner with their new toys. "You can't do this," Amanda stated flatly. "These things were Thomas's inheritance, his birthright." "Actually, they were my possessions to distribute as I saw fit," I corrected gently, "and I made these decisions months ago, long before today's announcement." Thomas looked up from the papers, face flushed. "Why would you do this to punish me?" I shook my head, feeling a strange calm despite the tension crackling through the room. "Not punishment, Thomas. Self-respect. For years I tried to atone for my failings as a young father. I accepted being treated as an inconvenient outsider in hopes of maintaining some connection with you and meeting my grandchildren. I endured Amanda's condescension and her parents' thinly veiled contempt." I glanced toward the Millers, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Through therapy and reflection, I eventually realized that allowing myself to be treated this way wasn't helping any of us. It wasn't teaching my grandchildren about genuine family bonds or mutual respect. It wasn't fostering authentic reconciliation between us. I turned back to Thomas. So I made decisions that aligned with my values and Margaret's memory. It wasn't about disinheriting you. It was about honoring what truly matters. Amanda's face hardened. You planned this all along. You knew we were going to cut ties and wanted to get ahead of it. Actually, no. These changes were made months ago as part of my retirement planning and life reassessment. I brought the documentation with me this weekend because after 7 years of rejection, I've learned to prepare for worst-case scenarios. I looked around at their luxurious home, the expensive gifts scattered around the tree, the evidence of material success everywhere. Clearly, you don't need my financial resources. You've made that abundantly clear. And now you've formalized what has been true for years. You don't want a relationship with me either. I reached for my coat, sensing it was time to leave. The Millers had retreated to the far side of the room, suddenly very interested in their drinks. Amanda was whispering urgently to Thomas, who looked pale and stunned. I should go, I said, moving toward the door. I wish you all well, truly. And Thomas, I hope someday you find what you're really looking for. It was never in that folder. Thomas abruptly stepped away from Amanda, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. Dad, wait, he called, his voice breaking on the word. For the first time that weekend, he sounded like my son rather than Amanda's husband or Gerald Miller's protege. I paused at the door, turning to face him. It wasn't supposed to. He struggled to find words, looking suddenly lost. Amanda moved to intercept, but Gerald placed a restraining hand on her arm, shaking his head slightly. Even he seemed to recognize that a boundary had been crossed. Thomas took a deep breath. Can we talk? Just us. Please. I considered for a moment, then nodded. There's a coffee shop near my hotel. I can meet you there in an hour. Without waiting for Amanda's objections, Thomas grabbed his coat. I'll be there. As I left the house, I heard Amanda's raised voice behind me demanding explanations. The grandchildren watched wide-eyed from the staircase witnesses to a family drama they couldn't possibly understand. In my rental car, I sat for several minutes processing what had just happened. The confrontation I had feared for years had finally occurred, yet I felt lighter rather than devastated, standing up for myself, refusing to be devalued any longer. It was unexpectedly liberating. I arrived at the coffee shop early, selecting a quiet corner table. Thomas entered 20 minutes later, looking disheveled and agitated, so different from the polished, controlled man who had formally excommunicated me from his family just hours before. Dad, he began as he sat down, then stopped, seemingly at a loss. Take your time, I said gently. He stared into the coffee I had ordered for him, black with 1 sugar, the way he had always taken it in college. I don't even know where to start, he finally said. That whole scene, it wasn't what I wanted. None of this is what I wanted. What did you want, Thomas? The simple question seemed to pierce whatever remained of his facade, his eyes filled with tears. I don't know anymore. I thought I did. Success, status, the right connections, but I'm so tired of trying to be perfect for Amanda and her family. The confession tumbled out in a rush, how Amanda's family had gradually taken control of every aspect of their lives, how their financial support came with invisible strings, how any disagreement with their values or methods was treated as disloyalty. They made it clear from the beginning that my background was insufficient, Thomas explained. My education was acceptable, but my family connections were lacking. Amanda's father offered to mentor me, which meant reshaping me entirely. And you went along with it, I observed, not accusingly, but seeking understanding. Thomas nodded miserably. At first it seemed like an opportunity. Their world was so different, powerful, established, certain. I thought if I followed their lead, I'd finally feel secure. And your mother's illness, her death. Pain flashed across his face. I know I failed her, failed you both. Amanda convinced me that maintaining professional momentum was crucial, that Mom would understand, because she was practical. His voice broke. But she didn't understand. I saw it in her eyes that last day, and I've been trying not to think about it ever since. What about today's announcement? Whose idea was that? Amanda's father suggested it months ago. He said my lingering attachment to dysfunctional family patterns was holding me back. Amanda drafted the speech. Thomas looked ashamed. I went along with it like I've gone along with everything for years. And my financial resources, were those a consideration? Thomas flushed. Amanda was Interested in your estate planning. She mentioned it frequently after Mom died. When you retired early, she became concerned about potential irresponsible decisions affecting our children's legacy. The pieces fell into place. The sudden Christmas invitation after years of distance, the theatrical family rejection, the shock at learning the inheritance had already been distributed elsewhere. "I'm not angry, Thomas," I said after a long moment. "Disappointed, yes, but mostly sad for what we've both lost." "Can we fix this?" he asked, sounding suddenly young. "That depends on what fixing means to you," I replied carefully. "If you're asking whether I'll reconsider the estate decisions to maintain contact with you, then no." "No, that's not what I meant," he said quickly. "I mean, can we try to have a real relationship without Amanda's family orchestrating everything, without pretense?" "That would require significant changes on your part," I pointed out, "and likely substantial conflict with your wife and in-laws." Thomas nodded slowly. "I know, but seeing you stand up for yourself today, it made me realize how long it's been since I stood up for anything that mattered to me." We talked for nearly 3 hours. Thomas shared more about the golden cage he had built around himself. Professional success without personal fulfillment, material abundance without meaningful connections, status without self-respect. I shared my own journey of self-discovery through therapy, volunteer work, and facing my failures honestly. We didn't solve everything in one conversation, but we established a foundation of truth that had been missing for decades. As we prepared to leave, Thomas asked hesitantly, "What happens now?" "That's largely up to you," I said. "I'm open to building a genuine relationship, but it needs to be based on mutual respect. I won't accept being treated as an inconvenient obligation or a potential resource. I deserve better, and frankly, you deserve better than living someone else's version of your life." He nodded thoughtfully. "Can I call you tomorrow?" "I'd like that," I said. The following months brought profound changes. Thomas entered therapy to address his long-suppressed grief over Margaret and his issues with authenticity and autonomy. He began standing up to Amanda and her family, establishing boundaries that were met with fierce resistance. 6 months after our Christmas confrontation, Thomas called to tell me he and Amanda were separating. She had given him an ultimatum: cut contact with me permanently or face divorce. He chose the latter, surprising both Amanda and himself. "It wasn't just about you, Dad," he explained. "It was about finally deciding who I want to be versus who they've been telling me to be for 15 years. The divorce was contentious. Amanda's family leveraged their considerable influence to complicate matters, but Thomas stood his ground. The settlement left him financially diminished but emotionally liberated. Our relationship rebuilt slowly, carefully. We had weekly calls that gradually became more personal and less guarded. He visited Boston several times, staying in his old room that I had renovated years earlier in hope. We established new traditions and acknowledged old wounds without letting them define our future. The most challenging aspect was maintaining his relationship with his children, who remained primarily with Amanda. He fought for regular visitation and worked to show them a different way of relating than the performance-based approval they knew in Amanda's household. 18 months after our Christmas confrontation, Thomas brought Jackson and Sophia to Boston for a week. In my home, free from the scrutiny and expectations of Amanda and her parents, the children gradually relaxed into more natural behavior. We built model rockets, observed stars through Margaret's old telescope, and talked about the grandmother they had never known. "Dad," Thomas said on their last evening as we watched the children sleeping exhausted from a day of normal messy play, "thank you for not giving up on me even when I gave up on us." "Family isn't just about blood or obligation," I replied. "It's a choice we make every day through our actions and respect for each other." The following Christmas was nothing like its predecessor. Thomas and the children came to Boston. We decorated a small tree with homemade ornaments and a few precious decorations Margaret had loved. We cooked together, played board games, and exchanged modest gifts, chosen with thought rather than to impress. It wasn't perfect. The children still struggled with the different expectations between their two homes. Thomas was still finding his authentic voice after years of suppression. I was still learning how to be present without overcompensating for past absence, but it was real, and that made all the difference. So what did I learn from this painful journey? That self-respect is not selfish but essential, that genuine relationships require mutual effort and respect, that it's never too late to break destructive patterns whether you're 64 or 42, that standing firm in your truth can sometimes be the greatest act of love. I wonder if any of you have faced similar family estrangements or reconciliations. Have you had to set difficult boundaries with loved ones? How did you balance self-protection with openness to healing? Share your experiences in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to rebuild what matters most. Thank you for listening, and remember, the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but the authentic connections we cultivate through honesty, respect, and love.